Hey YouTube, it's time for the 2020 edition of Pyraminx Intuitive L4E Example Solves. So for those of you who haven't seen the previous videos in this series, you don't need to, but I will link them in the description. L4E is an advanced method for Pyraminx. So if you currently use layer by layer, or the Bob Burton method, or something like that, or even a top first method, this video might be a little confusing and possibly not the most useful video to you. So that being said, this video is mainly meant for advanced solvers who use L4E or who understand L4E and the main concepts behind it. I will try to make it somewhat understandable for newer solvers, but keep in mind that if you are confused, this is an advanced tutorial. Also, for those wondering, this is Mr. M, set up by Stephen Wintringham. It has a number 2 on it because of the Mr. M challenge at Nationals that was supposed to happen but never did. I was the second seed. Anyway, moving on to Scramble number 1. Okay, so for Scramble 1, I would start out holding it like this. And the first thing I noticed is that this green and yellow edge can be put between this green and yellow center, and that will solve it in one move. So I also noticed that this green and red edge belongs here, and that can also be solved in one move, which is a B move here. So I'm going to do those in that order. So first I'll solve this edge, then I'll solve this edge this way, and then we will have a V. And in doing that, we will also have this blue and red edge in this spot, which will be the unsolved position in the V. And I can also see that the only move that will affect this back face is the B move that we're doing, and it will turn it this way. So we'll have the blue center on this side, and we'll have the red part of the red and blue edge right here, which means that we will be able to solve that edge very quickly once we get into L4E. That's all I would be able to see in inspection, so I would start out executing it. So to execute this, I would solve the tips in sort of a weird way. I'd probably do this sort of thing, do the B move like that, and then do these two moves. Now I would rotate like this, and now we have a really nice L4E case. So like I predicted, we can solve this edge in 3 moves just like that, in the back. And so you'll notice that I didn't have to actually predict the entire L4E case, but this solve, if I were to actually execute it, would still be pauseless. Because from inspection, I would know how to do the V plus this edge, which leaves us with an L3E case. And since I can recognize L4E cases pretty well, I know what L3E case this will set up after solving this edge. So I can see that it's going to set up kind of the weird case where you have to sledge into an insert. And I can tell that our AUF is actually going to be no AUF at the end, because the centers are already solved, and that's how this case works. So that's going to be this, sledge, and then insert. So you'll notice that there are actually quite a few double moves here. And I personally think that's the best way to execute this case. Other people may do it the more efficient way, which would be to just do, instead of like an L2, to just do an L prime. But personally, I think L2s and R2s are actually really useful for Pyraminx. So fast, this would look like this. And then I would move my finger up here to do the U prime tip. And as usual, on most solves, I only save one tip for the end. Alright, moving on to Scramble number 2. Alright, so there are a lot of nice things on this Scramble, a lot of blocks here. So the first thing I see is this green and red block, which is really nice. And then I also see this huge green, blue, and yellow block. So basically we have all of our green pieces solved. Now a lot of people might take the bait here and really try to just solve a layer. You could do that for sure. But I think generally it's not worth the number of extra moves that it would be, and it's better to just do an L4E case. And this is sort of a common idea in Pyraminx. A lot of times L4E is better than layer by layer. So like the last 4 edge cases are actually better than the last layer cases. So sometimes, even though a lot of pieces are solved, you don't want to actually solve that many pieces. It's better to sometimes purposefully unsolve some, just so you can get a slightly nicer case. So personally, I would start out by doing an R prime here to solve this center and mess up this green and yellow edge. Then I would solve this green and red edge and center, and then I would bring this green and blue edge up with the center. And I can see that this red and blue edge is going to end up here with red on this position. And I'll know that the back won't be turned at all, so we'll have the yellow center in front. Which means once we rotate like this, we'll be able to just do a U prime to get the blue center in front and easily insert this edge for L4E. So to execute this, I would start out like this. Note how I solved that tip. And then I would do this. Rotate. So if I had just seen this case, I would actually be more likely to sledge, and then U, and sledge again. But since I didn't one-look this solve, we actually end up with a slightly less efficient solution. So this is something that's definitely interesting and good to keep in mind. One other solution you could do for this L4E case is something like this, and then a U to an insert. Both of those are more efficient than what I'm about to do, but if I saw this legitimately in a solve, I only would have predicted up to here. So I would do my U prime, solve this edge, and then we end up with pretty much the worst L4E case, which is a sledge into an insert, and then a U prime. So that's a pretty bad execution of that L4E, but it does come at the pro of having no pauses in the solve and not having to one look. If you can one look on Pyraminx, you definitely would have seen a better solution there, but since I can't quite do it all the time, I would have just done that, and I think that's still a decent solution. Alright, moving on to Scramble number 3. Yeah, so on this solution, there is another very simple V that I would definitely take the bait for. And this is a 3-move V on green. So first I would solve this center by bringing it up, and I also see that this edge will be solved once I bring it down. So I would do an R, an L, and solve this tip, and then that would actually put this green and blue edge right in place here to be solved with a U prime. I actually do see that I could set up to a 2-flip here if instead I did R, L, B, U prime, but honestly 2 flips aren't as good as a lot of people make them out to be, and I personally wouldn't go for it. So again, in this scramble, all you really need to see is your V and then which piece is going to end up in the unsolved position, which is this blue and yellow one. So the blue will be here, and the blue center will also be here. So I'll need to do a U before I can insert this edge into the back. So anyway, executing that, I would do this. Just like that. I could have done those tips in a few different ways. That one felt the most natural to me when I was actually executing it. Then I would do this rotation, and we have a similar case to what we had before, a U. And so again, we have a similar L4E case where we insert this in the back, and then we can cancel into that L3E case. Again, not the best case, but it would have been pauseless assuming I executed it well, and that's pretty much what we're going for at this point. Anyway, let's move on to Scramble 4. So this is a pretty bad scramble. There are a lot of things that could be done here. None of them are particularly good, and I'm going to be honest, this scramble probably wouldn't be sub 3 for me. That being said, I probably would end up doing the blue V here. And what I can see here is that I can insert this edge into this position in 3 moves, while also solving this center and leaving a flipped edge in this place. Doing that will also put this yellow and green edge in this position, with the yellow on this side, which means that if we wanted to solve it, we could solve it while putting this edge in and sledging it. Which would guarantee a 2-flip. A 2-flip isn't really that good, so what I would actually plan to do is insert this normally on the other side instead of sledging it, and keep this in this position. And then we'll be able to have an L4E that will be 2 sledges, basically. And you'll see what I mean as we do it. So I would start out by doing some tips like this, and then inserting that edge, rotating, inserting this edge like this instead of sledging, because this gives us a really nice L4E case. Rotate, sledge, U, sledge. Sorry, that was a U prime, and then a small U for the tip. So I'll try to execute this a little bit faster. There you go. That's a very interesting case because it's not a very good scramble. There aren't many good L4E solutions there, at least that I'm able to see. And so you kind of have to forego some of the block building and just try to force a better L4E case. That's what I do a lot of times. I'll usually try to force an L3E case in something like that, but since in this case the L3E case would have been a 2-flip, I decided to just force a good L4E. And finally, let's do this 5th scramble. This scramble's great, and really interesting too. So the first thing I notice, of course, is this solved red and blue piece. And I see that we can get not quite a V, but a V-1 edge in 3 moves. And those 3 moves would be these. Anyway, I can also tell that after those 3 moves, this yellow and blue edge will end up right here, with the blue on this side. Which means that if we do 3 more moves to just sort of move this out of the way, move the center around, and then bring it back up, the yellow and blue edge will actually be solved right here in relation to the yellow center on this side and the blue center on this side. And in doing that, we actually will end up solving this green and red edge into this position, which is really great. I'm not one-looking this solve, but I can see that after those 6 moves, plus the tips, we will have this edge solved in this back position. Plus, we'll have this edge as the only one that needs to be inserted into the V, and it will be an L3E case, since the back edge will be already solved. Plus, we'll have a V. I can also tell that the red and yellow edge, which is the final one we'll have to insert, will be up here facing this way. The red will be facing this way, which means it'll either be a normal insert or a sledge into an insert. And I think that since I'm able to see all that stuff, it's not actually necessary to one-look this solve. As I've said many times, it's often not necessary to really one-look if you want to get good times. A lot of times you just need to sort of know the general direction the solve will go in, and you'll be able to do it pauseless. Another key thing here that I bet a lot of people overlook is that it's really important when you're solving the V, if you can, to make some progress on L4E to make sure you don't have a really bad case, like a 4-flip or something like that. Like in this case, we're actually solving an edge with the V, which gives us an L3E case, which is really great. So anyway, here's how I would execute it. So I would start out like this, solving those tips, and then doing this, solving this tip while I bring this up. I'd rotate, put this edge in, and then as I'm doing this, I would notice that since these don't match, we're just going to be able to insert this, and then it'll be solved. So we rotate, insert, U prime, done. So my hands aren't quite warmed up, but I'll try doing it a little faster. Like that. And yeah, so those are going to be the 2020 edition of Intuitive L4E Example Solves. Hopefully you learned something that you can incorporate into your Pyraminx solves, and hopefully you enjoyed. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video.